The last human left the moon in December 1972. 54 years later, we are finally going back. This is Artemis II. To really understand why Artemis II matters so much, you have to go back to December 1972. That was the last time a person stood on the moon. The mission was Apollo 17. The astronaut was Eugene. He was the last person to walk on the lunar surface, and before he climbed back into the lunar module for the final time, he stopped, looked around at the dusty gray landscape, and said something that has always stuck with me. He said, "We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return." And then he left, and for 54 years, nobody went back. And now in 2026, we are actually doing it. Artemis II is a 10-day crewed mission that will take 4 astronauts on a loop around the moon and back home to Earth. It is the first time any crew has left Earth orbit since Apollo 17. And it is not a nostalgia trip. It is the beginning of something much bigger. The plan is to eventually build a permanent presence on the moon. A base, a habitat, a jumping-off point for missions to Mars. Artemis II is the first real step in that direction. Now, before we talk about the crew, I want to spend a moment on the rocket, because it is honestly one of the most impressive things ever built. It is called the Space Launch System, or SLS. The first time I saw photos of it standing on the launch pad, I genuinely just stopped and stared at my screen. This thing is enormous. It stands 322 feet tall. That is taller than the Statue of Liberty, including her base. When fully loaded with propellant, it weighs around 6 million pounds. And when those engines ignite, it produces 8.8 million pounds of thrust. 8.8 million pounds. I always try to think of ways to make that number feel real. The best I can do is this. Imagine every powerful engine you have ever seen in your life. Every jet aircraft. Every ship engine. Every piece of heavy machinery. Add all of that together and it still does not come close to what this rocket produces in those first few seconds of flight. The 4 main engines at the base are called RS-25 engines. These are not new engines, which I find fascinating. They are the same design that powered the space shuttle for 30 years. Upgraded and improved, but the core DNA is the same. On either side of the main stage are 2 massive solid rocket boosters that produce most of the raw force during the first 2 minutes of flight. They burn through their propellant fast and then separate and fall away as the rocket continues climbing. Above the main stage is a smaller upper stage that will perform the critical burn, sending the spacecraft out of Earth orbit and onto a path toward the moon. That is the moment the crew commits to the journey with no quick way back. And at the very top sits the Orion spacecraft, the place where 4 people will live for 10 days while traveling farther from Earth than any crew in history. The crew named their Orion spacecraft Integrity. I think that is a beautiful choice. Let us talk about what it is actually like inside Orion, because people do not always picture this clearly. The interior of the crew module is roughly the size of a large SUV. That is the living and working space for adults for 10 days. No room to stretch out. No comfortable couch. No kitchen. Just a carefully engineered capsule where every single component has a purpose and every gram of weight was debated by engineers. Behind the crew module is the European Service Module built by the European Space Agency. This is the powerhouse of the spacecraft. For large solar arrays, for power, an engine for maneuvering, fuel, water, oxygen. This is not just an American mission. It is a mission built by multiple nations working together. And I think that detail says something meaningful about where space exploration is heading. One thing worth understanding about Orion is the heat shield. It is the largest ever built for a crewed spacecraft. During re-entry, Orion will hit the atmosphere at around 25,000 miles per hour. At that speed, the friction creates temperatures of roughly 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside of the shield. The material is designed to burn away in a controlled way, carrying that heat safely away from the crew inside. Now, let us talk about the 4 people making this journey. Reed Wiseman is the commander, a Navy captain, test pilot, an engineer who spent 6 months on the International Space Station in 2014. People who have worked with him describe him as calm, methodical, and naturally good at keeping a team focused under pressure. All qualities that matter when you are in charge of a spacecraft 250,000 miles from Earth. Victor Glover is the pilot, a naval aviator, test pilot, and engineer with multiple advanced degrees. He flew on SpaceX Crew 1 in 2020, and spent 6 months on the station. On Artemis, Segundo Victor Glover becomes the first person of color to travel beyond Earth orbit. The first person of color to travel to the moon. I do not want to rush past that. Space exploration has not always reflected the full range of people on this planet, and watching that change in real time is something genuinely significant. Christina Koch is one of the mission specialists, an electrical engineer and one of the most experienced astronauts in the world right now. She spent 328 consecutive days in space from 2019 to 2020, the longest single spaceflight ever completed by a woman. She also participated in the first all-female spacewalk in history. On Artemis II, Christina Koch becomes the first woman to travel to the moon. Across all of human history, across every Apollo mission, across decades of space exploration, no woman has ever made that journey. That changes on this mission. Jeremy Hansen is the other mission specialist, flying with the Canadian Space Agency, a fighter pilot, a former Capcom who spent years as the voice connecting mission control to crews in space, and the first Canadian to lead a NASA astronaut class. And here's the part that genuinely amazes me about Jeremy Hansen. Artemis II is his very first space flight. His introduction to space is not a gentle orbit around Earth. It is a loop around the moon. He becomes the first Canadian to leave Earth orbit and the first person outside the United States to travel to the moon. 4 people. 4 records that have never been set before. Now let us walk through what actually happens during those 10 days from launch to space. Launch day starts before sunrise at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The crew wakes up, has breakfast, suits up in their orange Orion crew survival suits, and makes the walk out toward the transport vehicle. They drive to the pad, take the elevator up the mobile launcher. Hatch closes. The count begins. 2 minutes in, the solid boosters separate and fall away into the ocean. About 8 minutes after launch, the core stage shuts down and separates. Orion and the upper stage are now in orbit. The crew immediately begins checking systems. Life support, navigation, communications. Everything is verified before the next major step. From this moment, the crew is on a path to the moon. For the next 2 days, they travel through deep space. They conduct experiments. Orion swings around the far side of the moon using what is called a free return trajectory, meaning the moon's own gravity bends the spacecraft's path and sends it back toward Earth without needing major engine burns. On the far side of the moon, more than 230,000 miles from any other living person, the silence, and knowing the moon's own gravity is carrying you safely back. When Orion comes back around and contact is restored, those 4 people will be at their greatest distance from Earth. A new record. Then the free return path carries Orion back over the following days. The crew continues their work. They rest. They prepare for re-entry. On day 10, Orion hits the atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. 10 days. 250,000 miles. The moon and back. Done. Now here's something important to understand. Artemis II is not the destination. It is a test flight. The landing comes next, with Artemis III, which will target the lunar South Pole. Scientists have confirmed that permanently shadowed craters near the South Pole contain frozen water ice beneath the surface. If that water can be accessed, it changes everything. A future base at the South Pole could potentially produce its own resources rather than depending entirely on supply missions from Earth. Then a surface habitat, a pressurized rover, power generation systems, and all of it is preparation for the bigger goal. Mars. Everything being learned about keeping a crew alive in deep space, dealing with radiation, growing food in confined environments. All of it applies directly to a crewed Mars mission. The moon is the practice ground. Artemis II is day 1 of that practice. I have followed space exploration for a long time. Every mission, and I thought by now I would be used to it. But something about Artemis II genuinely gets to me when I sit and think about it. It is not the rocket. It is the fact that Reed Wiseman has spent years preparing for a mission that pushes exploration further than it has gone in half a century. It is the fact that Victor Glover will travel to the moon and represent everyone. Not because she set out to make a statement, but because she is simply one of the best astronauts on the planet. These are not characters in a movie. They are real people. They have families waiting for them, and they are willingly climbing into a rocket and going to the moon because they believe the journey is worth it. When those 4 people are out there in deep space, further from Earth than any crew in over 50 years, something in the broader story of where we are going as a species shifts. The part of us that looks at a horizon and decides to find out what is beyond it wakes up again. That is what Artemis II means to me. Not just the engineering, the reminder of what is possible when people decide to go. So tere it is the full story of Artemis II. 4 astronauts, a spacecraft named Integrity, the most powerful rocket ever built by NASA. 10 days in deep space. And when it happens, Orbit Myth will be right here covering every moment of it with you. If you want to be here for that, subscribe to the channel right now. Hit the like button if this video gave you that feeling. The one where you remember how extraordinary space is, and how lucky we are to be alive at a time when this is actually happening. I read every single comment on this channel and I genuinely want to know. The crew is ready, the rocket is being prepared, and Orbit Myth is not going anywhere. See you at launch.